It's been a year and a half since the Sony A7IV has been released, and in that time we've seen the FX30, A7R5, and just recently the Sony ZV-E1. So how does the A7IV hold up in 2023? In this video, I'm going to give you 17 reasons why the Sony A7IV is still a great option in 2023, but also give you 3 deal breakers and reasons why it might not be. So right off the bat, the Sony A7IV is an amazing hybrid camera. It's perfectly balanced and absolutely stacked with features on both the photo and video side. So let's talk about all the features and specs. On the photo side, the Sony A7IV uses a 33 megapixel sensor, which means if you're shooting at the 3:2 aspect ratio or shooting in RAW, the resolution coming out of this camera is 7008 by 4672. These files are pretty big, with one RAW photo averaging about 30 to 40 megabytes, and every 30 photos or so eating up about a gigabyte of space. This is if you're shooting in full uncompressed RAW. For some, this might be too much or overkill, but I love it. With this huge resolution, I can crop in, print my photos, or have them blown up without any noticeable quality loss. Now, when it comes to video, we can shoot in 4K 24, 4K 30, and 4K 60. 4K is our highest resolution. However, because the A7IV is equipped with that 33 megapixel sensor, we're technically getting a 7K image downsampled to 4K. So when you compare 4K footage from the A7IV side by side to another 4K clip, you'll notice that it's actually much sharper with much more detail in our shadows, in our highlights, etc. This is actually much better than the Sony ZV-E1, which can shoot in 4K, but it's just a 4K image, not downsampled from something else, just 4K. Now, if you do a lot of video work, you're going to appreciate that the A7IV has no recording limit. Most cameras have a 29 or 30-minute record limit, which sucks because if you're in the middle of recording a video like this, it'll just stop the recording once we hit that limit. But with the Sony A7IV, that limit is gone. I don't have to worry about my video just cutting off like that because it's hitting some limit. I'm glad to see that Sony is getting rid of that limit on their newer cameras. The A7IV also has 2 card slots, one of them CF Express Type A and the other just a regular SD card. I'm currently using an 80GB Sony Tough card, and that's because it's durable but also has a high read and write speed for shooting video like this. But for anyone who does client work, you're gonna want a camera with 2 card slots. Actually, you need a camera with 2 card slots. That way, if something happens to one, you have a backup. Just imagine shooting a project for a client just to find out later the computer isn't reading your card. What do you tell the client? Or how much money will you lose having to reshoot everything again? I'm telling you, I used to have the Canon EOS R and it only had 1 SD card slot, and I used to worry after every single shoot that something would happen to that card. So having dual card slots is a necessity, and I love that the A7IV has both. Now, like I said, the Sony A7IV is an amazing hybrid camera with a lot of great video features. It can shoot in S-Log3, 422 10-bit, but it also has 2 native or base ISOs. The first one is at 800 and the other at 3200. Basically what this does is give you a clean image without introducing noise or grain. This is perfect for shooting in low light situations, and I can tell you right now, there have been so many situations where I had to increase my ISO past 800, and I'm glad that the A7IV has a dual base ISO without having to worry about getting noise and grain in my shadows, highlights, etc. Now, if you're thinking about buying the A7IV, finding lenses won't be a problem. The A7IV is equipped with an E-mount and takes E-mount lenses, which, if you don't know, is the same lens mount used in almost every Sony camera. So you have a ton of lens options from Sony to Sigma to TT Artisan, Viltrox, Rokinon, Samyang, Tamron, etc. This is a super important thing to consider when buying any camera because it means you have cheaper and more affordable lens options. The last thing you want is to be tied down and only able to purchase overpriced Canon lenses because they're sending out cease and desist letters to any camera that makes a lens with their mount system. Next, we have the multi-interface hot shoe. This is actually different from most other hot shoes, with electrical contacts at the back allowing you to attach accessories like the Sony shotgun mic without having to use any cables. We're actually seeing more and more accessories coming out with multi-interface compatibility, which I think is awesome. Now, one of my favorite things about the A7IV is the amount of custom buttons throughout this camera. It has this double dial here where you can switch between photo, video, and SNQ mode. And then on the top, you can switch between your custom modes and configurations. The nice thing about this dial is that you can configure any setting to each custom number. And they're completely separate from each other in different modes. So if you're shooting in photo mode, you have 3 custom photo configurations. And in video, you have 3 custom video configurations. Once you have these set up, you can switch back and forth between these configurations just by turning the dial. Now, I don't know about you, but I hate micro and mini HDMI ports. So if you're like me and you shoot a lot of video, you're gonna like the fact that this camera has a full-size HDMI port. Many cameras still have these small micro and mini HDMIs, including the new ZV-E1. So it's nice to see a full-size HDMI port on this camera. Using full-size cables are much more reliable, much stronger and sturdier, and the port doesn't get damaged as easy. They're also much more compatible with a lot of external monitors and recorders without having to buy a special cable. Now let's talk stabilization. The Sony A7IV has 5-axis in-body image stabilization, and it's really good. If you don't know what IBIS is, it's basically your camera's sensor on a gimbal. The sensor actually moves around inside the camera's body to smoothen out any handheld movements. This is perfect because I'm constantly filming handheld B-roll, mostly because I hate using gimbals and the hassle of setting one up. So it's nice that the A7IV has in-body image stabilization, which is basically your sensor on a gimbal anyway. Next, focus breathing. The Sony A7IV is equipped with focus breathing compensation, which a lot of Sony users are jealous of right now because they're still waiting for Sony to update their firmware on the camera they have so they can get it. But focus breathing is that zooming in and out effect your camera does when it's trying to focus on something. In movies, you'll see that cameras can rack focus without any zooming in and out at all. And that's because cinema lenses and cinema cameras have perfected this issue so it doesn't happen and they can get a more professional and more cinematic looking shot. But with DSLRs and mirrorless cameras and regular non-cine lenses, this effect is noticeable when trying to rack focus. So what focus breathing compensation does is adjust the size of your frame and crop your image in ever so slightly to compensate for that focus breathing. Meaning you can now rack focus without worrying about that annoying zoom in and out effect or that hunting for focus your camera usually does. Now in the Sony A7IV, we were given a new way to help us focus, and that's with focus mapping. Focus mapping allows you to see what's in and out of focus by using these blocks of color or this overlay of color. Areas that are in focus have no color overlay. Anything that is shown in blue is out of focus but behind your subject or the subject you're focused on. And everything in red is out of focus but in front of the subject you're focused on. Sometimes it can be hard to see what's in focus using focus peaking because it can be those lines can just be so thin. But this feature makes it super easy to see what's in and out of focus really quickly. The A7IV also has built-in live streaming capabilities. You don't need any special HDMI video feed converters. I actually have one right here. You don't need any of these. All you need is the standard USB-C cable that came with your A7IV and your camera. The great thing about this is that we live in 2023 now. More and more people are having work meetings over Zoom. People are FaceTiming all the time. We got people streaming podcasts over the computer, etc. And using a camera like the A7IV allows you to give your streams a super high quality look. You have autofocus, you got the bokeh, it's sharp, and a lot of things you just can't get with a webcam. You can also use it in low light situations because you have full control over all your settings like shutter speed, aperture, and ISO. So this is a super cool feature built into the A7IV. Now, if you ever worry about getting dust on your sensor every time you change lenses, you no longer have to worry. The A7IV has an anti-dust function called shutter when power off. What this does is close the A7IV's shutter to protect the sensor every time we power the camera off. I actually talked about this in my A7IV hacks video I made a couple weeks ago, but this is an amazing feature because our camera sensor is the most important component of your camera. Keeping it clean and free from any dust stops you from going in and cleaning the dust out yourself, minimizing the risk of damage to its sensor. I seriously have yet to clean the sensor on this camera since the day I bought it, ever since I turned on this feature. Now, I've seen a lot of people complain about the battery life on the Sony A7IV, but I've never had those same issues. I think the A7IV has some of the best battery life I've seen in some of these newer cameras. I've had many all-day shoots and events where I've shot 1,000 uncompressed raw photos all on one battery. Like, I usually bring 4 to 5 spares with me at all times and never even go through one. Even filming this video, I started with the battery at 100%. I've been filming for about 15 minutes now. XAVC S 4K footage, 24 frames per second, 422 10-bit C-Log3, and it's only at 85%, which I think is pretty good. That's like 6, 7 YouTube videos like these I can film all on one battery. That's crazy. Lastly, the build quality of the A7IV is just great. The grip feels amazing. It's the perfect middle ground for people with small and big hands. It's actually hard to get a good sized grip on a small mirrorless camera, but Sony was able to do that with the A7IV. I also think the button layout is perfect. Everything is perfectly placed and you're able to reach everything without having to take your hand off the grip. Now let's talk about some of the deal breakers or downsides with this camera. First is the one you've probably heard of a million times, and it's the 1.5 times crop you get when shooting in 4K, only in 4K. Honestly, this has never bothered me, but I know how it can for some. If you're shooting a scene at 24 frames per second and you got this nice wide composition, but now you want to switch into 60 frames per second, you no longer have that wide shot anymore. You're all of a sudden zoomed in, meaning if you want that nice wide compensation, you have to either switch it out of 60 frames per second, change out your lenses, your distance from the subject, or drop your resolution to 1080p. These are all not the best ways to solve this issue. So you see why this can be a deal breaker. Next, we'll talk about its rolling shutter. This is another one you've probably heard of a million times, and I'm not gonna lie, the rolling shutter on the A7IV is absolutely horrible. When panning really fast, it's extremely noticeable. Straight lines are no longer straight, and everything just looks like a blob of jello. And I knew this when I bought it, but here's the thing. When will you ever be whipping your camera side to side this fast? Probably never. And lastly, the Sony A7IV does get a little bit warm when shooting. Not hot, but warm. Like, I can guarantee you if I go and touch my camera right now, it's gonna be pretty warm. I've never had the camera shut off or give me any sort of overheating warning when shooting, even after filming for an hour, hour and a half, but it has gotten warm. Now, you might be thinking, I don't wanna deal with overheating issues or anything like that, but here's the thing, almost any camera you go with, doesn't matter which brand, is gonna have some sort of overheating or camera bodies getting warm. And that's because these companies are trying to fit in as much good features into a small compact body as possible. And there's a lot of Canon cameras like the R5 and the R6 that still have overheating problems, to the point where I'm shooting with my friends and their camera will just randomly freeze or shut off if it gets too hot. So I'm glad I haven't ran into any of these issues with the A7IV. With that being said, I think the A7IV is still a great option for photographers and videographers in 2023. I still think it's an amazing hybrid camera for the price, and it's packed with a ton of great features. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to leave a like and hit that subscribe button to see more content like this. And if you have any questions about the A7IV, drop them down below and I'll see you in the next one.